Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are tackling something that honestly frustrates a ton of absolutely brilliant writers: English punctuation. If you're coming from a language like Russian, well, you've probably been taught that punctuation is the set of rigid grammatical triggers, kind of like a math equation made of words, right? But today, I'm going to promise you something entirely different. We are going to completely shift how you view English punctuation. We're going to step away from seeing it as this chaotic list of rules to memorize, and instead, we're going to discover how it's actually a super powerful dynamic tool for controlling rhythm, pacing, and absolute clarity in your writing.
So here's our roadmap. Number 1, two very different systems. 2, the comma splice trap. 3, commas that change the facts. 4, dashes, colons, and semicolons. 5, quotes, apostrophes, and details. And finally, 6, a highly solvable problem. Let's dive in.
Part 1. Two very different systems. To fix the mechanical errors we so often make, we really have to first understand the core philosophical clash between how Russian and English handle sentences. Because it's not just about different rules, it's a completely different way of thinking about what punctuation actually does on the page. In Russian, punctuation is highly grammatical. It marks clause boundaries. If you see a trigger word, like the Russian equivalent of that or which, you mechanically drop a comma. It's almost automatic. English, however, is half grammatical and half rhythmic. Yes, there are structural rules for sure, but a huge part of English punctuation exists just to control the speed at which a sentence is read. It prevents the reader's eye from accidentally grouping the wrong words together. What this means is the common advice you hear to just use fewer commas in English is actually completely wrong. You can't just delete them. You have to use completely different tools to guide your reader's eye.
So why does all this matter? Well, because a misplaced comma in English usually isn't read as just a simple typo. It doesn't just make your writing look, foreign. It actually changes the literal facts of your sentence. When an English reader hits a punctuation error, they don't necessarily think, non-native writer. They literally think, wait, how many sisters does she actually have? It causes genuine and sometimes honestly hilarious misreadings.
Number 2, the comma splice trap.
And that brings us right to the single most visible error a Russian speaker makes when writing in English. It happens entirely because of that grammatical mindset we just talked about, and it is a massive trap waiting for you in almost every single paragraph. It's called the comma splice. In Russian, a comma is strong enough to join two independent clauses, meaning two complete sentences that could stand all by themselves with just a comma holding them together. But English strictly forbids this. A comma on its own is simply too weak to hold two complete sentences together. So writing, "The lecture was long, I fell asleep," with just a comma in the middle, that's not a matter of style. It is a structural failure that English readers reliably notice and unfortunately judge.
But remember earlier when I said this was a highly solvable problem? I meant it. There are exactly 5 distinct techniques to repair a comma splice, and they give you total control. First, you can use a full stop to separate them completely into 2 distinct sentences. Done. Second, you can use a semicolon to link them closely without a hard break. Third, you can keep the comma, but you have to add a coordinator like and or but. Fourth, you can turn one half into a dependent clause using a subordinator like because. Or finally, you can use a dash for a more abrupt, punchy, conversational tone. So 5 exact tools to instantly fix the problem.
But you gotta be careful here, because there is a massive trap hiding in plain sight. Words like however and therefore feel exactly like conjunctions. They feel just like but and, but they aren't. They are adverbs. And an adverb cannot join 2 clauses with just a comma. You can test this by moving the word around in the sentence. For example, you can say, she, however, wrote about it. But you definitely cannot say, she, but, wrote about it. Because however is an adverb, the semicolon or full stop comes in to save the day, whereas a true conjunction just takes a simple comma.
Section 3. Commas that change the facts.
Okay, we're going to escalate the tension just a bit now. We've looked at structural rules, but can a single comma actually lie? Like, can it give your reader completely false information about the world you're describing? The answer is an absolute yes, and it all comes down to how we treat extra information in a sentence.
Let's look at a quick example. Take the sentence, my sister, comma, who is a lawyer, comma, lives in Moscow. The commas here act like little handles. You can lift that entire middle phrase right out. It's just extra information. This implies you only have one sister, and hey, by the way, she happens to be a lawyer. But imagine that exact same sentence with no commas. My sister, who is a lawyer, lives in Moscow. Without those commas, that information is suddenly vital identifying information. It tells the reader which sister you mean, meaning it implies you have multiple sisters, and we are specifically talking about the lawyer right now. See how much power that one little mark has?
This perfectly brings us to a golden American-style rule. That versus which. That is used for that vital identifying information, and it takes no commas. Which is used for the extra disposable information, and it absolutely requires commas. And here's the kicker. These marks are never optional. The punctuation is quite literally the only thing telling the reader whether the information is a core fact or just a casual side note.
And here's another place where commas prevent reality from completely distorting front-loaded phrases. Remember when we said English punctuation stops the eye from grouping the wrong words together? This is exactly what that looks like in action. If you write, unlike her brother, Olga never drinks coffee, but you don't put a comma after brother, the reader's eye immediately groups the words her brother Olga together. For a fraction of a second, the reader thinks the brother's name is Olga. Adding that comma prevents this hilarious misdirection.
Number 4. Dashes, colons, and semicolons.
Let's transition over to some specific punctuation marks where Russian structural habits physically do not translate to English formatting. We're talking about the heavy hitters here, starting with the dash. Russian heavily uses a dash where the verb to be is omitted, so a sentence literally translating to my brother dash lawyer is perfectly fine there. But if you directly translate that visual habit into English, you end up producing a sentence entirely without a verb. My brother dash a lawyer. In English, this isn't a sentence. It's just a fragment. You absolutely must supply the verb is. The habit of replacing the verb to be with a dash just does not exist in English grammar.
Now, when it comes to the colon, there is one golden rule that even native speakers break all the time, but you shouldn't. A colon is used to introduce a promised list, an explanation, or a quote, but the setup before the colon absolutely must be a full, independent sentence. You cannot say the ingredients are and just drop a colon. Listen to the difference. It must be, we need the following ingredients. That's a complete clause. And then you drop the colon.
Part 5. Quotes, apostrophes, and details.
Moving right along, let's shift to the rapid-fire mechanics of formatting dialogue and those tiny little details that instantly elevate the polish of your writing. Visually, dialogue is a radically different landscape. Russian uses those beautiful chevron quotes, colons, and long dashes to indicate speech. English, it strips all of that away. We use high double quotation marks, and we rely heavily on commas to attach the speech to the dialogue tag. So let's rapidly review the 4 non-negotiable mechanics for English dialogue. Number 1, every time a new speaker talks, you must start a new paragraph. No exceptions. 2, in American English, commas and full stops always go inside the quotation marks, regardless of logic. Just put them inside. 3, dialogue tags stay lowercase, even after a question mark. It's, where are you going? Followed by, she asked, with a lowercase s. And 4, you use commas to replace full stops right before those tags. Seriously, get these 4 rules down and your dialogue will look instantly native. Now, a quick word on the apostrophe. Russian doesn't actually use this mark, so hey, you've got a clean slate here. The apostrophe is used for possession, like the writer's desk, or for missing letters, like in the word don't. But here is the ultimate sin of the apostrophe. It is never used for plurals. Literally never. Please, never write 2 coffees with an apostrophe. Never write CDs or the decade 1990s with an apostrophe. Just add the S and move on. And while we're cleaning up formatting, just note how numbers and dates literally flip the script between the 2 languages. For large numbers, English uses commas to separate the thousands and a period for the decimals. It's the exact opposite of what you might be used to. And switching over to dates, American formatting goes month, then day, then year, and you separate the day and year with a comma. It's just a quick mechanical flip you really have to keep in mind as you format your work. And finally, number 6, a highly solvable problem. Let's move to our conclusion and see how all of this builds your confidence as a writer in English. We've covered a lot of ground today, but I really want you to walk away feeling empowered. Because here is the absolute best news about everything we just discussed. Unlike the English article system, where, let's be honest, you might still be adjusting your use of a and the 10 years from now, punctuation is a finite problem. It's a completely closed system. There are really only about a dozen rules you need to master to completely close the gap between your spoken English and your written English. It can actually be finished. So, you have the tools now. You know exactly how to fix the comma splice. You know how to use commas to isolate extra information. You know the exact mechanics of dialogue. Those rigid mechanical triggers you used to rely on, they're gone. The question is, are you ready to let the rhythm drive your writing? And maybe more importantly,
What other hidden rules of English are dictating your writing right now without you even knowing it? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Happy writing!